right, thank you for staying with Daybreak. This is the continued coverage. 19 days, the polls, a lot is going on in the country. And one of the guests coming through to studio is Dr. Beata Martin Rozumiwovic. Thank you for making time. That's the Deputy Chief Observer, EU Election Observation Mission. And they're in the country to check on Kenyans, so to speak. Let's find out from her. Thank you so much for making time. So what really is the role of the EU Observer Mission?
Thank you very much. Good morning, Trevor. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, the role of the EU Election Observation Mission, like many international organizations, is to come to a country upon the invitation of the authorities and really to look at the extent to which the elections are taking place in line with national legislation, but also in line with international agreements that a country has made. And in the case of Kenya, it is signed up to a number of international conventions and protocols and principles, and so really to work together to see how democracy is moving forward in a particular country.
Yeah, and you've interacted with the IBC, the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission, which essentially is in charge of these elections happening in the next 19 days. What is your observation of the level of preparedness?
Yes, we've met with the IBC on a number of occasions, and I would say it's an ongoing relationship. So we have an election analyst as well as a new technology analyst and other members of the team who are working together to understand how the IEBC is implementing these elections. Yesterday, you will have heard that there was a testing of the system where our members also participated. And I would say that the process is still ongoing. So there are still many steps before us to see how that implementation takes place, and especially on election day when Kenyans go to vote. And so we continue to evaluate and we continue to see how that develops, and we'll be making a preliminary assessment a few days after the election to give our conclusions. But I would say it's a little bit early to judge at the moment how that process is going.
Yeah, because that's what I wanted to delve into. The systems were checked yesterday and you are there yourself. What is your preliminary observation of that trial system? Was it well? Is it on a level of, say, 100%? Where would you rate it? 50, 60, 100?
I think in Kenya, there are new systems which are being applied, new technology which was also used in the last election. We understand that there were concerns, continue to be concerns about that technology as well as procedural aspects. And so I think that testing process brought up a number of issues that the IBC will still be addressing, and we will be looking to see how that progress is made and whether those concerns continue to be addressed in a way which is according to the principles that I mentioned. Yeah,
in the last election, the EU was very categorical. That was when the leader, Mariachi Shake, I hope I pronounced that right, she stated that Kenya remains deeply divided in 2017, and she gave recommendations to that. Some of them was improving the resilience of the independent institutions. Is that still the situation now? Were those recommendations implemented in your view?
I think many of those recommendations still remain valid, and the report from 2017, which is a public report, if you go into it, you can see details and very many positive things, but also things that need improvement. And I think the idea of the divided society is something that we see in many countries throughout the world. And it's something that really should be addressed through robust democratic institutions. That really is the lodestone of how to deal with such grievances rather than taking things to the street, which happens in many countries. And so I think those institutions are still developing as they are in many countries, but hopefully they will be robust enough in this election to be able to process those grievances and any contests that candidates may have through legal channels and through a democratic institutional system.
Yeah, so there's the aspect back then of Kenyans being deeply divided, and then there's the trust in institutions.
Yes.
The Kenyans you've spoken to, 19 days to the polls, what is your assessment?
I think the assessment is variable again. There are many people who trust and there are many people who have concerns, but it's really, I would say, incumbent upon institutions to be as transparent and as accountable as possible to build that trust. And I hope hope that during this election process, it will show that that trust is being improved upon. As we see in many countries, once trust is lost, it's very difficult to regain. And so I think those principles of transparency and accountability are really key.
Yeah. What is the issue here in your observation, Dr. Biata? Is it just perception?
No, I think that there are certain principles and certain standards which pertain to these processes. Yeah. Principles like equality, principles like universality, principles like secrecy, that all citizens are treated equally and in the same way. And so perception is an important element, but it's also equally important that the procedures and the processes that are in place guarantee those kinds of principles so that each citizen feels that their vote is counted equally with the same weight and results in the kind of government and in the kind of policy that they would like to see in the country.
Yeah, one of the other recommendations was improved ICT arrangement, and we see now that the mission today has ICT analysts.
Correct.
Why is that so important?
So again, in many countries in the world, they are exploring the use of technology in their elections. This is happening not just in Kenya, not just in Africa, but also in European countries, in Asian countries, in Latin America. And really the question of how those principles translate into a technology space, they're obviously more difficult to understand for the average citizen because there is so much internal workings which are dependent on a knowledge of technology. But to see whether those technologies espouse the principles, whether they provide for secrecy, whether they provide for equality, whether they provide for security, and then to understand how that plays into the electoral process is important here in Kenya, but also important in many of the places where we work throughout the world.
Yeah, but also you're deploying social media analysts specifically.
Correct.
Why is that so important right now? Because the ballot will, many people are saying 19 days, most of the people are not even on social media.
Yeah. No, so I think social media in electoral processes throughout the world has become increasingly important. We've seen the divisive way that social media can interplay into a campaign process, and you only need to look at the United States or the United Kingdom to see how that can impact people's judgment and decision making. And so really not to say whether or not social media will have an impact, that's actually what we are looking at. And we have a team of 6 monitors who are looking at social media not only in English and Kiswahili, but also in 6 national languages to see how information which is presented in social media is then translated into the traditional media space, is translated into the campaign, and whether there are elements of divisive language or incendiary language which may emanate in social media but then has a fundamental impact on the process.
So is this really just about capturing the propaganda aspect of it, or is it about the language that is used on social media? What exactly are you looking for?
It's a bit of both. So capturing whether there is certain type of language being used which then may have an impact on the campaign, which would be incendiary or lead to certain types of behavior, but also looking at the extent to which truthful information is provided, but where misinformation or disinformation starts to spread, what are the patterns of that and whether it can be attributed to any particular source, and then to also see what impact that has on the campaign environment, and ultimately the ability of voters to make an informed choice in a proper information space.
So from the EU's perspective, what will this help with? Are you going to fact check it on the spot and say this is true, this is false? Or how is this going to be of benefit to the electorate?
We're not involved in a fact-checking process, but there are many legitimate groups and organizations in Kenya who are engaging in that kind of work. And so we're also in very close contact with such organizations to understand their methodology, to understand their approach, and also to reflect their findings and their concerns in our reporting. We always like to say that as election observers, we hope that eventually we put ourselves out of business, and it's really it's incumbent on the institutions institutions and the organizations of a country to take up that role, and for us to support that role as much as possible and to work together to share information, to share best practice, and eventually for those institutions to take up that role in a robust way.
Yeah, so the interventions are not to deter in any way. They're more
Correct.
like a post-mortem. But many people are saying that then why is that important? Why don't you stop it right there when it's happening?
No, I think the ability of observers to impact a process is really in their analysis and like a mirror to reflect accurately and honestly what is happening in a particular country in a particular time. And then to be able to give those findings voice, not only in the country, but also globally within the international community. And Kenya is a country which is very important to the region, to the continent, but also to the globe. And so that progress in its democratic aspirations is equally important to other countries around the world who have similar goals and similar aspirations.
How soon after the elections will we have the findings and recommendations of the EU?
Mm-hmm.
And where will you release this report? In 2017, there was a whole fiasco about the EU Observer Mission releasing that report in Brussels, Belgium, and not here.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we will make a statement of preliminary findings in the few days after the elections, but really that will be a preliminary statement which only covers the processes up until that point. And we do understand that many important processes will still have to take place. And so there may be tabulations still going on. There may be complaints and appeals which are lodged by candidates or contestants. And that whole process will be documented in a final report, which we release some 2 months to 3 months after the elections, with recommendations, as you mentioned. In 2017, like in all periods, we very much hoped that we would be able to release that report in country, and we would also seek to do that on this occasion. For various reasons, that wasn't possible in 2017, but we thought it very important that this information be in the public domain. In 2022, we really hope for a constructive process and the ability to engage with interlocutors, with stakeholders, and with other electoral actors so that those recommendations can be addressed in the following years in a partnership and in a process which can continue.
How wide is your coverage right now in the country?
So we last week deployed 48 long-term observers. They are based in 39 of the 47 counties in Kenya. A number of counties were not able to cover because of a security assessment made by our security experts, but that assessment is constantly being re-evaluated, and we hope that some parts of the country which we're currently not able to access, we may be able to have insights into. But in any case, we also liaise very closely with local organizations, with civil society organizations, with other institutions, even in the counties where we are not. So to get some level of information from a very representative sample of counties throughout the country, and then to have that information analyzed by our 13 core team members in the capital to present a robust, nuanced, but representative picture of the election.
Do you have a general idea of the other 9 counties that you're not covering?
Yeah, so we're in the process of making contacts in those 9 counties, and we're receiving information. Obviously, it will not be first-hand information that we see with our own eyes and ears, and so we will have to process it in that context. But at least we will have some level information from those 9 counties, and together with the first-hand evidence and information that we're able to gain in the 39 counties that were present.
So that's 8 counties left.
Correct. That's correct. Yes.
Okay. So you have an insight of what's going on in there.
Correct.
And this was basically just because of security, you say?
A security assessment based by, security experts and professionals.
So it's more about the safety of the EU people?
It's about the safety of EU observers, but also the safety of local interlocutors with our presence on the ground.
Yeah.
And so it's really incumbent on us in a duty of care to do no harm. And so we always seek to act in a way which is professional, transparent, but in a way that contributes and doesn't work to the detriment.
So are you then concerned that maybe the electoral process may not be free and fair in those 8 counties?
I think that's premature to say. It really depends on the local realities. We treat those 8 counties in the same way that we would treat the other 37 that were present in, 39 that were present in. Yeah. And so we really look for the observations and the evidence to see how that process develops rather than making any kind of preconceived judgment or notion beforehand.
Okay. How are you going to deal with the vernacular? Because that's a lot that's going on here.
Indeed.
Yeah.
In addition to all of the international staff that we have in our headquarters in Nairobi and across the country, we also hire national staff, and I think we'll probably have about 150 national staff members working in the headquarters and all around Kenya. Many of those people are experts in languages other than English and Kiswahili, and so we have people who are able to interact in Kamba or in Kikuyu or in Luo, and so we get knowledge in those languages as well. We, in addition to monitoring social media in 6 vernacular languages, also have a full-scale media monitoring in 6 vernacular languages, and minute by minute we look at different broadcasters, different radio stations to come up with both a qualitative but also a quantitative assessment of that media picture and to really have insights into the process not only in the national languages but also in the other languages that communities in Kenya speak.
What are they looking for? Are they looking for keywords? What is the training for your people, just so that we understand the context? Is it certain words that they've been told to look out for, or is it judged based on the situation at hand?
So there is a very developed methodology and a training that all of the monitors go through. There are certain actors and keywords that they are looking for, generally contestants or other aspects of the election, and minute by minute they analyze both for the mentioning of those particular categories, but also whether that is treated in a positive way or a negative way or a neutral way, and ultimately being able to come up with an analysis of how candidates are treated, how different positions are treated, and whether that is equitable, whether it's done professionally. For the state broadcaster, obviously there are further obligations during an election process, and to make a judgment and an assessment of that in a way which is methodologically sound.
Yeah, and you've spoken about you meeting the IEBC officials and speaking to the people as well in terms of their feelings. Have you met the candidates? What are their sentiments?
Thank you. We've met a number of candidates. Yeah. We still have to meet a number of candidates as well. I think many of them are, I would say all of them are very active in this campaign, and one thing that is very clear is that there is a robust campaign underway. There are different positions which are being expressed, and also certain concerns about the ability of certain institutions to carry out this process. We, of course, take on board those concerns. We look into the allegations that are being made. We look for evidence of those types of conclusions, and those are all things that we will present in the preliminary statement after Election Day.
There are those who are saying that the deployment from the EU is quite early this time. Is it?
I would say it's according to standard methodologies, and I think I've observed many elections in my career, and I would say that this deployment is on schedule for the types of long-term observation that we would do in any country. Just before Kenya, I was in the Gambia on a similar long-term observation mission, and it was a similar timescale, so I think we treat countries equitably in terms of the deployment to be able to capture all aspects of the process before, during, and after an election.
How do we compare to other countries you've been?
We as an organization, but also as the Declaration of Principles community, so that's more than 55 organizations, including organizations like the African Union or the OSCE, other credible organizations working in this space, look at each election on its own merits. And so we look to compare a particular election, as I said, against the national legislation, against the international principles, but not to judge that country against previous elections that it had or other elections around the world. So really to take each election on its own merit and to see the extent to which it lives up to those principles.
Okay, and finally, what is the best possible scenario in your view and the worst possible scenario?
I think the best possible scenario is that Kenya is able to achieve the goals that it set itself, which is really to become an ever more democratic society, one in which citizens' voice is heard and respected, and which leads to the kinds of governments and the kinds of relations that they would like. And for us as the European Union, but also other members of the global community, to work in tandem, in partnership, to reach those kinds of goals together and to help each other, since we've now found very clearly that democracy is not a linear process. There are ups and downs, and many kinds of countries are experiencing problems with their processes, and so really to learn from each other and to work together to achieve those common goals.
In the worst possible scenario?
The worst possible scenario, I think, is disengagement and a feeling of isolation. And I would very much hope that Kenya feels part of a fabric which allows it to move in that democratic direction, and that the efforts of the European Union can help in that direction. But of course, there are very often voices that are to the contrary and would like to see a different path. And we very much hope that that set agenda which Kenya has set itself will be one that it continues on.
Okay. And finally, if you're speaking to Kenyans, I know this is the second finale and the real finale. You should speak to the Kenyans who are watching you today, because you're going to interact with them over this period of time. What is the one message you want to pass to them?
So I would like to say asante sana. I thank you very much for inviting an organization like the European Union to come and to be part of this process, and really to express yourselves and to empower yourselves through the democratic process, to cast your vote as you feel fit, and to really see democracy as part of the solution rather than part of the problem.
All right. Thank you so much for making time this morning, Dr. Biata. Dr. Biata Martin Rozumiwovic. I have to be very careful with that name. Deputy Chief Observer, EU Election Observation Mission here in the country. We'll see how that turns out in the next 19 days when you go to the polls. We had a conversation earlier on the deputy presidential running mate debate. Here's how it went down.